Thought is conveyed without speech through breath. The true wireless telegraphy is the rightly established current of breath. It is difficult for everyone to try it without the practice of concentration and in absence of the development of breath. Though unconsciously, always thoughts are exchanged by the means of breath. The scientist is ready to believe that contagious diseases are taken by one from another by means of breath, but it is the part of psychology to realize that thoughts are taken, such as humor, depression, energy, or sloth, by the means of breath. In the presence of an angry person, one feels excited and inclined to anger. The contact of a humorous person spreads around the atmosphere of humor. In the presence of a cold person, one becomes cold. The contact of a warm-hearted person warms one. And this is all done by the medium of breath. If an angry person were to close his breath while angry, much less of his feeling would affect another. If a person who is subject to humor would close her breath in the presence of an expert comedian, she would protect herself from being influenced by him. Yogis who rise above the thoughts and feelings of those around them attain power by the control of the breath. So the method of the inner cult of Sufis also depends upon the science of breath. Pleasure, displeasure, the message of affection, the warning of hostility, all is received by the way of breath. The one who is conscious of the rhythm of breath and whose breath is pure from grossness begins to perceive a sense which becomes in time a language to her. Thought reading is not necessarily an intuition, although many confuse thought reading with intuition. There is not much difference between the work of these two faculties. The difference is like the difference between the telephone and the telegraph. Thought reading comes from without, intuition comes from within. Although for both rhythmic breath and a clear mind are necessary. The rhythmic breath helps the mind to be clear. Breath breaks the congestion, which in the head produces confusion, and in the heart depression, which covers the thoughts of others from one's perception, even from one's own intuition. A thought is better conveyed to another through breath than by speech. For a feeling put in words becomes half dead. Feeling in its own sphere is fully living, and when conveyed from there through breath, it reaches the mind to which it is sent. When a person has not developed her mind by concentration, and when she tries to send her thought by the breath, she is not always successful. She is like a person trying to hit a target without ever having practiced in her life. It is practice which makes one perfect. So Moshe speaks here about the communication that is possible through breath itself. How much we can understand from those around us simply by drawing in information through the breath. And that means being attentive to one's own breath and being attentive to the breath of another. So if you are in the presence of someone who is perhaps sympathetic to you or perhaps unsympathetic, you'll recognize that person's condition by tuning into your own breath, feeling the rhythm of your inhalation coming in and exhalation going out, feeling the subtle indrawing of magnetism and light, and the radiation of life and light that goes out through your glands, through your eyes and hands, and indeed through the entirety of the aura that surrounds you. The more that you identify with the body of light, of which the physical body is just the visible part, the more refined one's sensation becomes. And every encounter is an encounter with another life field that is vibrating, that is glowing. And so instead of getting caught up in your preconceptions about that person and your judgments about that person, just feel the palpable vibration, the rhythm of this person's breath, the waves of this person's thought and speech and movement. It's one thing to think about that, to speculate about it. It's another thing just to sense directly through the life field. And that's only possible when one has more and more inhabited one's breath and come to feel one's breath as oneself. And then one senses the breath of everyone as the state of their self. And then not only can you receive information, you receive knowledge of that person's state, but also you can respond through the breath. Respond by reaching out through the breath, reaching out invisibly. So there's a story which helps to explain this, and it's a story from the Jataka tales, one of the tales that Pirzadi Shahida Noor retold, which tells about two little pigs that an old lady found in the forest. She adopted them and gave them the names Mahatundila and Kulatundila, and she treated them like her own children, doted on them, fed them delicious things. She loved them. But one day there was a festival in Benares, and the neighboring people became drunk, and in their drunkenness, having exhausted the feast that they had prepared, went out looking for more to eat and came to the house of the elderly lady, knowing she had these pigs. And they said, "Grandmother, give us your pigs to eat and we'll pay you." And she said, "They're not for sale. They're my children." But they wouldn't accept refusal. And cunningly, they made her drink and become drunk. And then again, persuaded her to give them a pig, give them her two pigs. And now in her intoxication, she came under their coercive power, and she thought, well, just one of them perhaps. And so she called, Kulatundila, Kulatundila, come. And the older pig, Mahatundala, he could tell something was wrong because she would always call Mahatundila first. This time she called Kulatundila. He knew something was wrong, and he hesitated. But meanwhile, Kulatundila ran out to her, and then what did he see? All of these men with bloodthirsty glances and nooses in their hands, and he knew something was wrong and ran back to Mahatundila and said, I am afraid. Mahatundila understood now, said, yes, it's come to this. It's for this that we have been fed. It's time for us to go now. But Kulatundila began to weep terribly. He was so frightened. And Mahatundila took pity, and his heart was moved, and he said these words with full of emotion, full of feeling, without any fear in his own heart, but feeling the fear in Kulatundila. Bathe in the pool of water as on the bright feast day, and you will find a perfume that never fades away. And as soon as he spoke those words, the whole crowd became sober. They dropped their nooses. They were spellbound. Even the birds in the trees stopped chirping. Everyone listened and turned toward Mahatundila. But little Kulatundila, he was still confused. He didn't understand. He said, Mahatundila, what do you mean? What pool of water? And what is this perfume? I don't know this perfume. And Mahatundila said, my dear, the pool of water is love. And the fragrance of love will never fade away. And everyone hearing Mahatundila in this way, in these simple words, preach the gospel of love, their hearts just melted. They were moved to tears, and his voice carried far into the city. And everyone was swept up in a rapture. And they took these two pigs in procession. They took them to the palace, and the king likewise was moved to tears, and he honored them and adorned them with silks and ornaments, and gave them a great feast. And henceforth they lived in the palace as dignitaries, and Mahatundila became the judge of the land and resolved with justice all of the disagreements that existed in the kingdom until the king died, and then Mahatundila and Kulatundila both retired to the forest and lived out their days in simplicity. So this is a story about the breath. It's a story about a situation in which the breath of everyone was in the tamasic state, a disordered state of great appetite and selfishness and rowdiness, and even the old lady got swept up into it. Her breath couldn't withstand the influence of that intoxicating breath. And Kulatundila was swept into a state of fear. But Mahatundila resided in the depths of his own breath and brought forth a breath of sattva in an act of truth, in which, in the simplest words, he spoke of love. And those same words spoken by another in a different rhythm of breath would have landed nowhere. But in the state that he embodied exactly what he said. He was the pool of water. He was the fragrance that will never fade. And no one could ignore the reality of that act of truth, of that sign of love. So, this is an illustration for us of what it means to understand the world around us by means of our breath without getting caught up and intoxicated by and distracted by the impressions that reach us from outside, but rather reach back out, find the center of your breath, find the calm, still center, and from there, respond in whatever situation.